Good morning, guys. Pastor Andy. Today is January the 13th, so we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 13. Proverbs chapter 13 is an awesome chapter. It's got some verses in it that just will hit you upside the head like a cinder block if you read it. As I was going through here, there was 3 verses that really just spoke to me this morning. The first one is Proverbs 13, verse number 10. Now, as men, this is a tough one for us because we don't want to think that we're wrong. But Proverbs 13:10 says, "Pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise." Or the old King James says, "Only by pride cometh contention." So when we have problems, when we have contention, when we have arguments, when we have confrontation, the Bible says that comes because of pride on one or both sides. So if there is no pride, then I'm not going to be worried about what people say about me. If there's no pride, I'm not going to be really upset when somebody does something to me. It's only by pride that contention comes, or pride leads to conflict. If I'm not worried about my rights, then I'm not going to be worried about this conflict. But it's when 2 people who have pride at the core of their person, or who allow pride into their life, that conflict comes. Because if I'm not proud, if I'm not worried about myself and somebody does something, I can walk away. Then there's no conflict. It's only by pride that comes conflict. So when we're faced with a conflict, we got to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, as they say, and make sure that pride is not at the center of this conflict. Then when you skip down to verse number 16, the second verse that really just jumped out at me is this one, and it says, "Wise people think before they act. Fools don't, and even brag about their foolishness." If we have this conflict in verse number 10 where pride leads us to conflict, then you tie it together with verse 16, wise people think before they act. Well, if we think before we act, there's not going to be conflict. So when we are using wisdom instead of our pride and acting out of wisdom and God's wisdom and not our natural nature that's inside of us, there's not going to be contention. There's not going to be problems and fights. Because wise people think before they act. You know, a lot of times I'm guilty of acting before I think. And I think if we're all honest, we probably would have to say the same thing. We react instead of stop, think, then act. But wise people think before they act. Fools don't. I sure don't want to be in that category. They even brag about their foolishness. That's a tough one. Skip down to verse 20. This one here is very important, and it's a verse that we use with teenagers or young people a lot, but it's a verse that is very applicable to us as adults as well. The Bible says in Proverbs 13:20, "Walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble." You know, who we hang out with, who we spend time with, who we are close friends with is very important because they can either lift us up or they can pull us down. I heard a preacher say one time that you are now or you will soon be what your friends are. So we shouldn't go looking for friends that we can try to pull up to where we are. We should be looking for some wise, godly friends and make those our closest one, because walk with the wise and become wise. If wisdom is your goal, then we need to have wise friends. We need to look for godly people that we can build relationships with. Now, that doesn't mean we isolate ourselves from the rest of the world and we don't associate with people who are not believers or who are not wise. It just means who we spend the bulk of our time with, who we are running around with all the time. The people that are in our closest inner circle need to be wise. I'm always looking for friends, close friends, who are further along than me so that they can help me in my spiritual journey. So I think there's a good lesson here for us as adults, and as young people too, but especially as adults, that we need to be careful about who we spend our time with, just as much as our kids do. So I hope that you'll read Proverbs chapter 13 sometime today. Look at these 3 verses, look at your life, and see how God would apply these verses to you. God bless you. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow.